What if the Earth was missing its center, and somehow humanity still survived on it? Not cracked apart, not destroyed, just shaped like a giant cosmic donut. Sounds impossible, right? But here's the strange part. Physics says a planet like this could actually exist. And if it did, everything you know about gravity, oceans, sleep, space travel, even the moon itself, would completely break. Picture standing on the edge of the world and looking up, only to see mountains curving above your head, continents hanging in the sky, oceans bending around a giant hole that should not exist. And that's only the beginning. Because on this Earth, gravity wouldn't pull the same everywhere. Some people would weigh almost nothing. Others would feel nearly normal. Entire civilizations would evolve under completely different physical laws without ever realizing how bizarre their world truly was. But how could a planet like this even form? That's where things get weird. Scientists call it a toroidal planet, a torus world. But honestly, it's basically a giant donut floating through space. Now, planets aren't supposed to look like this. Gravity naturally pulls matter into spheres. That's why every major planet we know is round. So for a donut Earth to exist, something massive would need to fight gravity itself. And that force would be rotation. This planet would spin insanely fast. Faster than anything humans have ever experienced. Why? Because if it slowed down even slightly, the entire world would begin collapsing inward. The donut hole would shrink. Mountains would buckle. Oceans would rush toward the center. Eventually, the planet would crush itself back into a sphere. And that means every second of life on this Earth depends on constant motion. But that's not even the craziest part. A full day on this planet wouldn't last 24 hours. Not even close. One complete day would last only 2 hours and 50 minutes. Think about that. The sun would rise and set over and over again. 8 separate days packed into what we consider one normal Earth day. Imagine trying to sleep while sunlight keeps returning every few hours. Imagine entire ecosystems forced to adapt to nonstop cycles of light and darkness. Human biology would completely change. Work schedules wouldn't exist the way we know them. Schools, cities, relationships, even memory itself could evolve differently in a world where night never lasts long enough. And for animals, it would be chaos. Migration patterns would fail. Hunting cycles would break. Entire species tied to sunlight and moonlight rhythms might evolve into something unrecognizable. But then scientists realized something even more terrifying. The faster this world spins, the stranger gravity becomes. And that changes absolutely everything. On normal Earth, gravity feels predictable. Down is always down. But on a donut Earth, down depends on where you're standing. Near the outer edges of the planet, gravity would feel somewhat familiar. You could walk normally, build cities, live your life. But closer to the inner ring, everything changes. Gravity weakens dramatically. Some regions would feel almost like Mars. A single jump could launch you several meters into the air. Sports would become superhuman. Buildings could stretch far taller than skyscrapers. Humans born there might grow taller, thinner, maybe even physically weaker over generations. And this is where it gets weird. Gravity wouldn't pull straight beneath your feet anymore. Near the inner curve of the donut, gravity would pull at strange angles toward the surrounding mass of the planet. That means if you stood near the center edge and looked across the hole, you could potentially see entire cities suspended above you. Upside down, people walking across landscapes hanging in the sky. Imagine watching thunderstorms roll across the inner curve while mountains literally bend upward around the horizon. It would feel less like a planet and more like living inside a science fiction hallucination. But somehow, life could still survive, maybe even thrive. And because gravity is weaker in certain regions, space travel would become dramatically easier. On our Earth, escaping gravity requires enormous rockets and terrifying amounts of fuel. But on the donut Earth's equator, escape velocity drops almost in half. Launching into space would suddenly become cheap. Simple. Routine. Entire civilizations could become spacefaring centuries earlier than we did. But that technological advantage hides a dangerous problem. Because while humans are launching rockets into space, the planet itself is barely holding together. Every moment, gravity is trying to destroy it. And then scientists asked an even bigger question. What happens to the moon? At first, the answer seemed simple. The moon would still orbit the Earth. But then the calculations became disturbing. Instead of circling smoothly like it does today, the moon could become trapped near the center hole itself, bobbing up and down endlessly like a pendulum in space. Or worse, it could spiral into a bizarre figure-8 orbit around the planet. And if that happened, Earth's tides would become completely unstable. Entire oceans could surge unpredictably across coastlines. Sea levels might rise and fall with terrifying speed. Coastal cities could become impossible to maintain. But that's not even the worst consequence. Because unstable tides don't just affect oceans. They affect climate. And that's when this world stops looking fascinating and starts looking dangerous. At first glance, the climate of a donut Earth seems surprisingly normal. Cold poles, warm equator, clouds, rain, oceans. But the deeper scientists looked, the more unstable everything became. Because this planet's shape changes the flow of air itself. Winds wouldn't travel the way they do on Earth. Storm systems could spiral unpredictably around the inner ring, trapped in endless loops by the planet's curved geometry. And inside the central hole, conditions could become extreme. Massive mountain ranges would likely form along the inner walls of the donut, towering higher than anything humans have ever seen. Not Everest. Bigger. Much bigger. Imagine cliffs stretching into the clouds while entire civilizations live beneath mountains curving overhead. And here's the strangest part. People living on opposite sides of the inner ring might actually see each other across the sky. Tiny glowing cities hanging impossibly above them at night. A permanent reminder that their world is fundamentally wrong. But despite all this chaos, humanity might still survive. No extinction event. No instant apocalypse. No fiery destruction. Just adaptation. And that changes everything. Because civilizations on this Earth would evolve differently from ours in ways we can barely imagine. Think about oceans for a second. On our planet, oceans connect continents. They allow trade, exploration, expansion. But on a donut Earth, crossing oceans could become far more dangerous due to unstable tides and violent weather patterns. Entire civilizations might remain isolated for thousands of years. Different languages, different sciences, different beliefs about the universe itself. Some societies might never discover the true shape of their planet. Others might worship the central hole as something divine. And this is where things get really unsettling. Imagine growing up on this world without ever seeing space. You'd look upward and see land above you, mountains above you, cities above you. Your entire understanding of up and down would collapse. Astronomy would become unbelievably confusing. Ancient civilizations might think the world folds infinitely inward forever. Some might never realize they live on a planet at all. But then comes the twist nobody expected. This strange world may actually avoid some of Earth's greatest disasters. No asteroid impacts in the same locations. Different tectonic behavior. Different ocean currents. Entire extinction events from our history might never happen here. Dinosaurs may have survived. Human evolution may have happened differently. Everything changes. But what happens next changes everything even more. Because eventually, humans on this world would ask the same terrifying question we once asked ourselves. What exactly are we standing on? The moment civilizations on a donut Earth discover physics, reality starts falling apart. Because every equation would expose contradictions hiding beneath their feet. Gravity wouldn't behave cleanly. Horizons wouldn't curve normally. Even the stars might move differently across the sky due to the planet's insane rotation speed. At first, scientists would probably think their calculations were wrong. But then evidence would pile up. And slowly, humanity would realize they're living on one of the strangest worlds imaginable. But here's the truly terrifying part. The planet may never be fully stable. Remember, this world survives only because of constant rapid rotation. If anything slows it down, asteroid impacts, gravitational interactions, internal shifts, the entire structure begins collapsing inward. And nobody living there could stop it. Imagine discovering your entire planet exists in a fragile balance between survival and self-destruction. Every sunrise becomes a countdown. Every year, scientists monitor rotational speed, praying nothing changes. Because if rotation decreases even slightly, the donut hole begins shrinking. At first, people wouldn't notice. Then oceans start moving. Earthquakes increase. Mountain ranges crack. Gravity patterns shift unpredictably. And eventually, the planet begins folding into itself. Continents collide. Atmospheres destabilize. Oceans rush toward the collapsing center like water draining from a sink. Civilization would witness the literal death of its world in slow motion. And that's when humanity faces an impossible choice. Stay and hope physics somehow stabilizes the planet. Or escape. Luckily, space travel on this world is easier than ours. Rockets require less energy. Launches happen constantly. So maybe humanity survives by abandoning the planet that created them. Entire fleets leaving through the center hole while the world collapses behind them. And this is where the story flips completely. Because after generations of living on a donut-shaped world, humans might reach other planets and discover something shocking. Most planets are spheres. Normal. Stable. Simple. Imagine the existential crisis. To them, a round Earth would feel alien. Impossible. Absurd. Children might laugh at the idea of living on a giant ball floating through space. And maybe somewhere out there, another civilization is doing exactly that right now. Looking at our perfectly round Earth and wondering how anyone survives on something so strange. But that's still not the biggest mystery. Because there's one final question scientists could never fully answer. Would a donut Earth actually feel wrong to the people living on it? Or would it simply feel normal? That question changes everything. Because humans adapt frighteningly well. If you were born on this planet, you wouldn't question the curved skies or upside-down continents hanging above you. You wouldn't fear 8 sunrises a day. You wouldn't think weak gravity was unusual. It would just be life. And that realization is deeply unsettling. Because it means reality is far more flexible than we like to believe. What we call normal may only be the result of where we happen to evolve. But here's the strange part. A donut Earth might create completely different human psychology. Imagine generations growing up under constantly shifting skies, endless rapid days, strange gravity, cities visible overhead. Art would change, religion would change, even the concept of direction would change. There may not even be a true meaning of up. And because civilizations could remain isolated for thousands of years, entire human species might diverge culturally or biologically across different regions of the planet. Some adapted for low gravity, others for mountainous inner walls, others for unstable coastal zones constantly battered by chaotic tides. Humanity itself could split into multiple versions of what it means to be human. And then one day, they finally meet. What happens when two civilizations from opposite sides of a donut planet discover each other hanging in the sky above? Would they see gods, aliens, or reflections of themselves? And this is where the story becomes almost philosophical. Because the shape of a world doesn't just affect physics. It affects destiny. Maybe some of history's worst disasters never happen here. Maybe entirely new catastrophes emerge instead. Maybe humanity becomes more united, or far more divided. All because one planet formed differently. But after all the strange gravity, impossible landscapes, collapsing oceans, and upside-down cities, one mystery still remains. If intelligent life can survive on something as bizarre as a donut-shaped Earth, then how many impossible worlds are really out there? And what if somewhere in the universe, a civilization is asking the exact same question about us?